Welcome to Yarn and Garden. Today we're going to continue working on the sunflower tote bag. In my most recent video I showed you how to make this sunflower square, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to make the square and triangle pieces to go in between. This is a corner to corner style granny square, and you can stop in the middle and just make a triangle. So let's get started. We are going to use the same yarn that I used in the last video. It's this Baby Bee Sweet Delight. The recommended hook size for this yarn is a 7, but like the last video, I'm going to use a 5. We are going to start with a slip knot on your hook. You don't need to leave a long tail. Now you're going to go ahead and chain 4. And then we will just slip stitch that together into a ring. Once you slip stitch that circle together, you're just going to chain 3 for your first stitch, and then we are going to work 3 double crochets in a cluster into that circle. I'm going to insert my hook right into the middle of that ring, and I am also going to work around that end of the yarn so I don't have to weave in the ends after I'm finished. So here's our first double crochet. That chain 3 at the beginning does not count as a stitch this time, so we need to make 2 more into the same space. So here's our first cluster of 3 double crochet, and that chain 3 at the beginning is going to be kind of a border, so we're going to add another stitch on the other side of the cluster. That way we have the border stitches going all the way around. For this last stitch in each row, we are just going to chain into that first loop, and then we're going to finish the double crochet like normal. So now we have a border stitch on each side and a cluster of 3 double crochets in the middle. We are going to start and finish each row the same. So to begin the next row, we're going to chain 3, and that's going to be the border stitch on the next row. So now we'll turn our work and we'll start working clusters of 3 double crochets, and in this row we're going to end up with 2 clusters. You're going to start by inserting your hook into that space between the border stitch and the first cluster that we made. We are going to increase every row, so the next row will have 3 clusters. Then once your square is as wide as you want it, we will start decreasing the rows to taper it back off. So here is our first cluster and that border stitch. Now we will make 1 more cluster on the other side. And we'll make our second cluster in the space between the border stitch and the cluster from the first row on the other side. So now we've got our 2 clusters. We're going to make the border stitch to finish this row, just the same as the last row. Yarn over and pull through a loop like you're going to do a double crochet, but we're just going to chain through that first loop and then finish the double crochet like normal. So there's the second row finished, and we're going to start the third row just like we did the last one. So we're going to chain 3 and turn, and that is our border stitch, and then we'll start working our clusters into those same spaces. Here's our first cluster. Now we're going to start working the next one in the space in between the 2 clusters from the previous row. Now the last cluster of each row is going to go just before that border stitch from the previous row. We're going to finish the row with the same border stitch as before, and then start the next one with the same chain 3 for the border stitch, just like we've done for the last few rows. Now we're just going to continue these rows the same way until we get to 8 clusters in a row. I think this corner to corner method would be great for a large project like a blanket, because you don't have to start out with a long chain on one side. You can just start out with that little ring and increase as you go. At the end of last year, I saw a lot of great videos of people's weather blankets that they had finished, and I think I at some point would like to make one, and this is one of the stitches that I've been thinking about using for that project. I am one of those people who is always trying to figure out ways to keep myself motivated on a project. So making things easy, like not having to start with a long chain on one side and not having to weave in a bunch of ends and that sort of thing, is something that I really gravitate towards when I am thinking up a project. So here we are, just finishing up the 8th row, which will have 8 clusters in it. And if you need to make the triangle piece, you can just finish off here, just pull your yarn through and cut it off. These triangle pieces make a really nice border if you're making something out of granny squares and you want to have them oriented diagonally like this. These little triangles will fill in the spaces and give you a nice straight edge of whatever it is you're making. I'm going to use the triangles to finish off the top edge of the tote bag that I'm making, but I'm also going to need some square pieces to build the bottom of the bag, so I'm going to show you how to decrease the edges and taper off to finish the square, and then we'll make a bunch of pieces and put them together in the next video. So now we're going to be working the decreasing rows. Those border stitches are going to be the same, so we're going to chain 3 and turn, and we're going to skip that first little space that we've been working into for the increase rows, and we're going to go right into the gap between those 2 clusters in the previous row, and that's going to be the beginning of each decreasing row that we make from here on out. For your decreasing rows, you are going to end up with 1 less cluster in each row, so this row is going to end up with 7 clusters across the entire row. At the end of each row, your border stitch is still going to be the same, but just like the beginning, we're going to skip that space. So we're not going to put a cluster in that last space, we're just going to do that final border stitch into that space. And then we'll just chain 3 and turn, and we'll start the next row. We're going to start each decreasing row the same way, skip that first space between the cluster and the border stitch, and we're going to finish each decreasing row the same way. We are going to skip that last space. So that last space will just have the border stitch in it, it doesn't get a cluster. So you can see after our first 2 decreasing rows, the corners of the square, and we're starting to taper back down to the point. So we'll just keep working the rows the same way until we get to the last row, which will have just 1 cluster in it. So here's our last cluster. We're going to do the border stitch just the same. Now we're going to finish this off and make it kind of a round little corner like the beginning. So we're just going to chain 1 and turn, and then we're going to do a normal double crochet into that opposite space, and that's going to finish it off and make it look the same on both ends. After that double crochet, you can just chain 1 and pull your yarn through, and then you can snip it off, and this square piece is done. I'm not going to worry about weaving in my ends because when I'm putting the tote bag together, I will start working the ends in as I attach all the pieces. And I only have a few more pieces to make, so I will be posting a video on how to put together the final product very, very soon. Thanks again for watching.